exactly.
And emotional openness can only occur when you're willing to feel your fear, guilt and shame.
Yeah.
And shutting down the emotions of fear, guilt and shame will mean that you will not find the truth about those particular issues. So it's very, very important to open emotionally up to the emotions of fear, guilt and shame. And this is where I see most people still struggling. They are refusing to feel the fear-based emotions.
Yeah.
And as a result, they're still in the heavy projection of the addictive layer, which is self-attack, self-punishment, judgment, self-judgment, judgment of others, and so forth.
Yeah.
They are the negative things. I remember we talked about that we're often projecting as addictions in order to avoid fear, the fears, which are the group of emotions that are fear-based.
Yeah.
Fear is
Shame.
one, shame is another, guilt is another.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we continue to allow either what we believe are the positive addictions or the negative addictions, the things that we do that feel good, or the things that we do that feel bad, which are still addictions, in order to avoid feeling the fear, shame and guilt and other fear-based and terror-based emotions, then we will never discover the truth to what's really going on and why we do something.
Yeah.
So it's a very important general principle for everybody to begin working through the addictions, whether they are in one group or the other, whether they feel good or they feel bad, they're still addictions.
And I've noticed a lot of people, and to some degree I did this, I've always had a problem with self-punishment and judgment, but to some degree I lived a lot in what I called positive addictions, where I get things, I feel a bit better.
Alcohol, whatever.
Travel, whatever.
Travel.
Keep in mind that the motivation was addictive. And then when I realised the sin, intellectually, there's a sin in that, and so I started to be a bit more sensitive to that, stopped all that. Yeah. But
you're still left with the negative group.
Because I really, really wanted to shut down the fear-based emotions. And so I felt it was more acceptable and less sinful to use the self-punishment and judgment.
Yes, in other words, more acceptable to use the feelings, the addictions that feel bad than it is to use the addictions that feel good. And so we tell ourselves that that's progress, but it actually is just swapping one addiction for another.
And actually, in a lot of ways, it's perhaps stopping being, I can't say that either, but I had the false sense that I was stopping being as unloving to others, but I was being more unloving to myself. But actually, as I've worked through it, it's not true.
No, once you realise the damage of self-attack, you realise that in that place you're actually harming others a lot. And also expecting a lot from others.
And it's also can be a way of manipulating others,
because you
eliciting
want them
emotions
to cheer you
from
up
you,
and make you feel better.
So many things where it's actually not just about yourself, even if you tell yourself that in that state. Yeah.
So usually when we're in the bad feeling addictions, we want other people to make us feel good. We want other people to make us feel like we're nice.
Am I progressing? Did I really feel this? Or whatever it was.
Exactly. Want other people to make us believe we're progressing because we feel bad.
Okay, I don't feel all good in those addictions anymore.
Yeah, we're not anymore in the addictions. Isn't that great? No, you're still in a whole heap of addictions. So they're just ones that feel bad now.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to give up both. And often I find, like for example, for yourself, it's taken you a lot longer to give up the addictions that feel bad than it has to give up the addictions that feel good. And that's particularly the case with people that have been brought up with shame.
Right.
That's particularly the case because the addictions that feel bad are the go-to addictions that are the heaviest suppressors.
Because that's the way that to suppress shame.
Yes,
it's judgment.
It's a much more effective tool.
Yeah.
Than a positive addiction like going out and drinking. And also a lot of so when I say positive addiction, the ones that feel good, the ones that feel good often have negative connotations to them anyway. For example, in society. So for example, let's say you take drugs because it feels good, but in society there's a projection of that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So can you see even the good ones have projections from other people that feel bad.
Yeah.
So even
the only things maybe is like workaholics and career people who use their career addictively.
Yeah, sooner or later your wife or your husband complains about that.
Yeah.
so sooner or later they all feel bad. But they feel good initially because they meet the frenzy of the addiction. And what I'm suggesting is that we often then we recognise those much more easily because, you know, we can see what we're doing often more easily doing things like that. But we often have a complete blind spot when it comes to these ones that feel bad that we're still using as addictions. And guilt, you know,
judgment, self-punishment.
Self-punishment and judgment is just a suppression of guilt and shame and fear.
Yeah.
You know, so we need to see that these are tools that we've been taught to use, just like the other ones.
Yeah.
Usually what I find is this: the so-called feel-good addictions are usually self-generated. We found them, and we like using them.
Yeah.
The ones, the feel-bad addictions are generally the ones we've been taught in our childhood to use upon ourselves in order to get the approval of others.
Although I would say that I chose the feel short-term good. Some of those I chose because they were accepted by my family unit.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's like
they weren't enforced upon me, but they
felt good to you still.
Yes.
They felt good to you still. Whereas whenever you go into self-punishment or self-judgment, that doesn't feel good to you, even though you're encouraged to do it in your family.
That's right.
That's still doing it to you, so you're definitely encouraged to do it. But
that's a major way they're trying to shut me down.
Yes.
All the time.
Yeah. But the good ones are more acceptable because we feel we get at least some positive response from it. So the feel-good ones, we feel there's at least some benefit to.
Yeah.
The feel-bad ones are our go-to ones because they are usually the strongest. They're usually the ones that are the most deeply ingrained.
Yes.
And also what I find for most people, they are usually the ones that are most difficult to give up.
Yeah,
because they receive the most negative attack from families in particular.
As soon as you stop judging yourself, you get that external judgment back.
Yes.
I see that.
Yes.
And I would say definitely that's been so very, very difficult for me to work through because it was almost like with the feel-good short-term addictions, I was able to identify the compulsion much more quickly.
Well, the reason
emotionally,
for that is quite clear. With the feel-good addictions, generally society at some level doesn't think they're good.
Yes.
So for example, you've got drinking or alcohol, drugs of some kind,
coffee,
too much,
chocolate, sex, whatever,
abusive sex or whatever, or promiscuity,
or even being a bully, or
you get fat, or you get you eat too much and you get fat.
Yeah.
All of those things are looked down upon. So when you give them up,
you
get some society approval, right? With the negative ones, that's not the case. With the ones that feel bad, if you give them up, you get more disapproval.
Yeah.
So for example, with the group of addictions that are all make you feel bad in the first place, which are self-attack, self-abuse, self-punishment, and so forth.
Self-blame.
When you give them up, society generally around you feels that you're a bad girl now or a bad boy now because you should think you're bad.
And you're getting too big for your boots and what are you up yourself? What's going on with you? Shouldn't you be ashamed of yourself? That's something you should feel guilty about. All that stuff comes at you.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's quite the barrage.
That's why it is much harder to see and also much harder to give up the addictions that feel bad.
And we're made open to them, as you said, in our childhood because it comes at us externally. We live with it all the time.
Not only that, most of them, most of our good addictions, if you can call them that, they should be called feel-good addictions.
Yeah.
Most of the feel-good addictions usually occurred or were established later in our life.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is we weren't allowed to drink until we were 16 or 18 or 21, right? Or, in some cases it might be 10, but it's usually not when we're 4.
No.
Right? And we couldn't take drugs when we were 4, generally. Some finish up doing so, but only because of a terrible environment. Usually they take drugs as a choice later in their life, right? They're introduced to it in their teenage years or whatever. The introduction to the feel-good addictions is usually later in life. That's why they're easier to recognise and easier to give up.
Yeah.
But the introduction to the feel-bad addictions occurred right from conception.
Yeah.
And so therefore they are much, much more difficult to give up.
And so within that grouping, you would add things like denial of self, denial of pleasure, denial of personal, fulfillment,
denial of truth,
sexuality, denial of truth, all those things.
They're addictions.
They're addictions that really are instilled very, very young.
Yes. And well established in the family, and well established that if you disagree with them,
you'll be punished.
You will be severely punished, if not physically, certainly emotionally.
Yeah. But if you live in them, keep denying yourself, keep putting the family first, keep whatever it is, then you get approval almost, which is sort of a short-term way to feel better about yourself. But in the end, you end up as an adult feeling worthless.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's very important for the listeners who are addressing any issues, including issues of sexual feelings, that that are injury or addiction based, to understand that recognizing and feeling the so-called good feeling addictions is going to be much easier process than recognizing and feeling the addictions that feel bad.
So even you would say like a daddy's little girl and stuff like that, which is kind of an addiction that you might get a feel-good feeling from. Eventually society kind of tends to look down on that, don't they? And in the end, if you're daddy's girl at 45, there's some people still are, but it's sort of like
there's a lot
there.
that are because of the emotional incestuous relationship that generally continues throughout everyone's life. But it's not generally like if you're married and your daddy's little girl, your husband's not going to be too impressed with it generally, unless him and dad are pretty much in cahoots with each other, and often they're not. So you'll get pretty upset with you.
And I suppose it's almost a negative type addiction, isn't it? Because you are in that space, being daddy's little girl. You kind of
the problem with the daddy's little girl
negative
stuff is that is an addiction that was caused right from usually from the
very
moment,
early.
and often from the moment of birth or before. So any addiction that is established from the moment of birth or before is going to be very hard to give up. But it is usually the negative addictions that have been established at an earlier time. Not always, but usually. Right, have been established at an earlier time. If there are any that are present, they'll have been established at an earlier time. This is also why giving up substance abuse is much easier than giving up emotional addictions.
Yes.
Because substance addictions were usually taken on later as a result of the emotional addictions.
Well, that's what I was going to say. My goodness, I feel like I use substances like drinking in order to avoid the already pain that I felt about judging myself and self-punishing myself. Correct. It was like a short-term alleviation of terrible pain I felt from another addiction. But I can see why if people never deal with those feel-bad addictions, they're driven back to other short-term feel-good addictions because there's a terrible pain there where they're treating themselves very badly, aren't they? And they're...
Well, again, I just feel it's an addiction. It's an addiction to do it, and you've got to find the reason. It's like any addiction.
Why doing it.
If you're really sincere about addressing any addiction, and you have to be sincere about addressing any addiction if you're ever going to feel any causal emotion. You are not going to feel any causal emotion unless you do. Yes. So
and I definitely misspoke because I said it's a terrible pain, but when I really feel about working through those issues, it's a belief, and as I work through it, it is relieving, but I do face fear. There's a terrible fear I face of the terrible punishment that I think is going to...
reason why the addiction exists. To prevent the feeling of something you're afraid of. So even the self-judgement, giving that up, just the fear of the parental punishment that happens. And that's pretty simple. That can be pretty big fear, actually. And it can be that simple too, though. And this is where I see a lot of people complicating their lives severely, is they give up the good feeling addictions because they recognise them relatively easily. Not all of them, the ones that have been established from birth onwards, they don't give those up generally. They give up the ones that they can see. The ones that are easy to see because they came to you later in life. And they were choices generally that you made. So the addictions that you made choices to establish, generally are easier to give up. But the addictions that other people established inside of you, which are all, earlier than birth onwards, those addictions are much, much more difficult to give up.
And when you say that other people established them, really you're saying that the environment enforced, say, an emotion externally, which we then used our will to would you say, where does our, because in
the child doesn't have a developed will.
No.
So the child automatically absorbs the negative emotion from its environment.
Yep.
And this is the damage we do to our children that we must stop doing.
Yeah.
We've got to stop damaging our children by these damaging emotions that come out of us because we've chosen to not heal them. And those emotions enter the child. The child doesn't have a developed will to stop it from entering it. Yeah. And so it automatically enters the child. And usually that occurs even during the gestation period after conception. And by the time we're certainly born, we're used to accepting certain emotions from people, even though we're usually born crying and we cry for the first year of our life a lot because we can't, if they feel terrible. But the reality is we're absorbing a lot of these emotions still, absorbing the belief systems, absorbing all of these different things into our soul. And that's why they're so difficult to give up, because all of that absorption occurred before we intellectually chose anything.
But it's almost become ingrained in our understanding of will because we've been doing it so automatic. Like, what I'm trying to get to, I suppose, is the question, like, now we're adults, me with my self-punishment or judgment, that I was actively using my will to continue a pattern that my environment enforced on me when I was little. And so I had to engage with my will
to get rid of self-punishment.
To get rid of self-punishment, didn't I?
When you say didn't I, I did. You haven't yet, though.
No, but I have.
So it is a process that you go through, right?
Yeah.
So yes, but the reality is it's going to be harder to give that up than it is to give up drinking.
Because of this thing you're saying.
Yes. Because giving up the thing that came from childhood is much, much more difficult than giving up the thing that you chose because it made you feel good. Temporarily, I know, but it still made you feel good. And it's going to be, so you give that up, then you're going to have exposed to you the emotional reasons why you chose those particular addictions, and that's going to be the more difficult phase. Because the emotional addictions are much, much more difficult to give up than the substance addictions.
They are. And as you say, I do feel I've made some progress in that area, but I'm not completely free of it, even after really giving up a lot of those feel-good addictions 7 years ago. Not all of them, but a lot of them.